I'm Tristellian, and welcome to the guide for the Havoc Demon Hunter in Legion 7.0. Demon Hunters are a brand new hero class, and in this video I'll focus on showing you their fundamental mechanics. Usually in these guides I put together all the abilities and then go through them, but without talents there really isn't a great deal to see, so we'll just build it up as we go along. So let's get started. Havoc resources use a builder-spender system. It's called Fury and caps at 100. Demon's Bite is your Fury generator. Every hit gives 20 to 30 Fury. Chaos Strike is your Fury spender. It costs 40 Fury, refunding 20 on critical hits. And it's these two buttons that form the basis of your single target gameplay. In isolation, there are no mechanics to define anything beyond generating Fury with Demon's Bite and then using it with Chaos Strike, making sure of course not to cap and lose Fury. However, with some talents, it really favours building up enough Fury to start Chaos Striking consecutively. So it will be good to get in that habit right from the start. Throw-Glaive is a ranged attack that can hit a total of 3 targets. It doesn't cost any Fury and is the only ranged option you have. But untalented, it is unlikely to be included in the single target rotation, but should of course be used if you find yourself out of range of anything. Next, I-Beam is a channeled ability that deals chaos damage to everything in front of you. You can point the beam, but are otherwise locked in place, stunned for the duration. It costs 50 Fury with a 45-second cooldown, and as it's a frontal cone, make sure you're at the side of the group. Whilst you want to be using this on as many targets as possible, if there is no AoE within the cooldown, you can use this single target. And as with everything, it will depend on tuning at the time, but will be less debatable once you gain the weapon trait, Anguish of the Deceiver. Blade Dance is a more traditional AoE that damages nearby targets. It has a cooldown reduced by haste and gives you 100% dodge chance for 1 second. Moving on towards combat mobility, Fell Rush is like Roll from the Monk, but damages all targets you pass through. It's your primary form of getting around, and with talents it becomes an integral part of your gameplay. You don't have to rush in the direction you're facing, you can control it with the strafe buttons, but you can't go backwards. It's worth noting that there is no spammable AoE on the spec. After using I-Beam and Blade Dance, and to a lesser extent Throw-Glaive, this is the only thing in the core setup that can deal multi-target damage. Vengeful Retreat is like the Hunter's Disengage, sending you backwards. It also slows targets nearby before you go. Moving on to cooldowns and the rest of the spellbook, you have one big offensive ability, Metamorphosis. It's on a 5-minute cooldown, costs nothing to activate, and turns you into a demon for 30 seconds. This change increases your haste and turns your Chaos Strike into Annihilation and Blade Dance into Death Sweep. There are no mechanical differences to these abilities, they simply hit harder, and the increased haste shortens the cooldown of Blade Dance, now Death Sweep. As there is no flat increase to total damage, you don't want to be spending your time or Fury doing things like I-Beam, which is a little strange thematically, and because it only increases 2 Fury spenders, you want to be starting the process with as much Fury as possible. And then you simply spam Annihilation single target and Death Sweep AoE. The other main cooldown is your Artifact Weapons ability, Fury of the Illidari. You can't aim it, it just throws glaives down at your current location. Ideally, you want to hit as many targets as possible, but just use it as often as you can. As for defensives, you have Blur on a 1-minute cooldown, increases your dodge chance and reduces damage taken. Darkness is on a 3-minute cooldown. It creates an effect at your location that gives all players inside a chance to completely avoid damage. Whilst this will statistically mean you will reduce overall damage for your raid, it doesn't reliably mitigate anything. Utility-wise, Consume Magic is not the usual interrupt. It has a 20-yard range and returns 50 Fury when you successfully stop a cast. So if you are raiding as a Demon Hunter, you want to be first in the queue for interrupt duty. Chaos Nova is a 5-second stun, Imprison is crowd control on a demon, and Spectral Sight lets you see stealthed and invisible players and NPCs. It's not a whole lot of use for this in PvE, but definitely useful for PvP. And now we arrive at the last of the general mobility. Double Jump has finally made it into WoW. You can now jump again in the air. Glide is a slow fall that appears to be using the Goblin Glider mechanic, as it starts with a small amount of thrust. You can repeatedly toggle Glide on and off, and it will last forever. And you can use Fel Rush in midair, so you can cover quite large distances if you start high enough. And finally, we arrive at Shattered Souls. They work around soul fragments, which are fuzzy purple balls spawned from killing mobs that heal you when collected, and when from a demon, they give a short increase to damage. There are also lesser soul fragments found in talents. They drop during combat, not death, and whilst they do give the heal, they don't give the damage. Okay, let's move on to talents. As Demon Hunters start at 98, they unlock their talents as they level to 110. So, Tier 1 or 99 has a mixed start. Chaos Cleave simply makes your Chaos Strike deal some damage to a second nearby target. It's sustained damage, but only useful if you have 2 targets. It does nothing for AoE, and has no effect single target, which are the most common situations you'll find in raiding, so it's not particularly helpful. Next up, Fel Mastery increases the damage of Fel Rush, and it returns Fury if it hits anything. And as long as one is always recharging, you have the freedom to use the other anytime within that window. However, you will be intentionally dashing around the boss, and in raid encounters, that usually involves things on the floor like fire. This means you'll need to know where is safe before you rush to it. Blind Fury increases the duration of I-Beam. However, I-Beam already lasts 2 seconds with 5 ticks per second, so this makes it 3 seconds. It isn't as good as simply increasing the damage because you are stunned in place for the entire time. The opportunity cost of getting those 5 extra ticks gives up all of the fury generated and the damage dealt by Fel Mastery over the rest of I-Beam's cooldown, as well as the direct damage comparison because Fel Rush is also an AoE. But as this is your primary AoE cooldown, it's possible they could resolve this in the future. Otherwise, it's a little disappointing to have what is effectively a trap talent in the very first tier. But here we go. Tier 100, Demonic Appetite, gives Chaos Strike a chance to spawn lesser soul fragments. These give you a heal and almost enough fury for another Chaos Strike. Proc rate for this seems a little low currently, and given the other options this tier, there isn't a great deal of use for this in raiding. However, when you're out questing in the world, you are very reliant on fragments to heal yourself, so for leveling and general questing, I recommend this talent. Demon Blades replaces Demon's Bite as your form of fury generation and puts it into the auto attack. This rolls on the autos of both hands and shows as shadow damage, which generates fury. This doesn't roll when you are waiting for the global cooldown. In those occasions, the proc rolls over, and several can be stacked at a time. These deferred procs are then slowly added back onto your next procs. And because these procs roll over, rather than sitting there doing nothing waiting, throw Glaive to fill some dead time. They have stated they don't want this talent to be the best option this tier, but it was for quite a while and could be again. And lastly in this tier is Prepared, which shortens the cooldown of Vengeful Retreat and gives fury over time if you hit something with it. It's useful for regular movement, and like Fel Mastery, synergizes with momentum. Tier 102, Fel Blade is a short-range charge generating fury. Demon's Bite can reset the cooldown, so the idea is to use this beforehand when given the option. This is even more mobility and can be used as a general charge or as a way to quickly return to a target after retreating, or to correct wayward attempts at Fel Rush. First Blood reduces the cost and increases the single target damage of Blade Dance. The damage increase attempts to turn Blade Dance into a single target ability, so all you would do is just use it off cooldown. And the fury cost reduction is very handy if you are faced with any sustained periods of AoE, as you are getting the same results for a lower cost. Bloodlet gives Throw Glaive a bleed. It stacks with itself, so there is no problem with overwriting, and as it affects all 3 targets, is an effective cleave. This introduces Throw Glaive into your rotation, and is just something else you use off cooldown. Tier 104 is the utility tier. Netherwalk is like Rogue's Cloak, and is the way to immune boss mechanics, but it comes with a severe penalty because you are unable to attack. Desperate Instinct triggers Blur when you get to low health. It gives the same effect with half the cooldown, but only when you are already well on your way to dying. Soul Rending gives you 100% leech during Metamorphosis, making you effectively immortal. The downside is that you only get it when transformed. But if there is a phase with very high raid damage that isn't done in a single hit, this will mitigate most of it. Tier 106, Fel Eruption, deals single target damage and stuns them. If they can't be stunned, they take double damage. It's a big single target hit that you drill into whatever is stun immune nearby. But given the competition this tier, there is almost no chance you'll be using this talent. Nemesis increases your damage by 20% against one target for 1 minute on a 2-minute cooldown. If that target dies, you gain 20% increased damage against all targets of the same type for the remainder of that 1 minute. This is a very simple cooldown, it's up half the time, so make sure you use all the bigger cooldowns during it. Nemesis starts out as a debuff on a target, and once that dies, you gain it as a buff on yourself, so you can game it a little for AoE by killing a matching creature type before the AoE starts. Beyond that, just use it when you can. And at long last, we arrive at Momentum. Fell Rush and Vengeful Retreat give you a buff increasing your damage by 20% for 4 seconds. The reason why it gives such a large increase in damage is because, unlike Nemesis, which is a set amount of time covering everything you use, not only is the total available uptime for the buff longer, but you can also determine what you put in it. The idea is pretty simple. You build up Fury, then use either Fell Rush or Vengeful Retreat, and immediately spend that Fury during the buff, without, of course, throwing yourself out of melee range into the middle of nowhere. This is the main issue and is difficult for mobs with small hitboxes, but the medium or large hitboxes found on most bosses shouldn't be a problem. To stay within melee range, you are drawing a straight line across a circle, so you need to make sure your angle is good enough to stay within the diameter and behind the midpoint of the boss. If you know you're going to overshoot, try and correct for that beforehand. Tier 108. Master of the Glaive gives Throw Glaive 2 charges and a snare. The snare isn't that interesting for PvE, but with 2 charges it synergizes with Bloodlet. If it is strong enough to be used single target, you can now keep glaives on cooldown without losing any recharge time. Unleashed Power removes the cost of Chaos Nova and shortens the cooldown. A defensive talent useful for situations where you are having to stun off cooldown. Demon Reborn resets some cooldowns when you use Metamorphosis. Demon Form doesn't increase the damage of I-Beam, so you wouldn't be wasting Fury on it during meta anyway. If you wanted to turn Demon Form into a defensive cooldown, take Soul Rending. Tier 110. Chaos Blades is just another 2-minute DPS cooldown. It lines up with Nemesis, so make sure you have Fury stockpiled and other cooldowns ready. Fell Barrage is a charge-based, targeted, channeled AoE. It doesn't cost Fury to use, you just have to keep track of how quickly charges are generating. Their base recharge rate is slow, and it relies on procs. They are generated off any hits, so are stacked rapidly during AoE using things like I-Beam and Blade Dance. So there is therefore a synergy with Blind Fury. And in this section of video I've used the Legendary Helm to show you how quickly you can chain your AoE. Demonic turns you into Demon Form for 5 seconds after casting I-Beam. This is the same form as Metamorphosis and gives you Annihilate in Death Sweep. Does not trigger Demon Reborn in Tier 108. Does, however, work with Soul Rending, and the Leech is countered on I-Beam as well, so this becomes a great tool for questing out in the world or mitigating a period of raid damage. Okay, that's all the talents. So for builds, you have the Momentum synergy with Fell Mastery, Prepared and Momentum, and they tie in with the Master of the Glaive and Bloodlet synergy. And then you throw in either Chaos Blades or Fell Barrage at 110. If you don't like Momentum or are unable to use it, take Nemesis. That removes the synergy with Prepared, so you are probably left with Demon Blades. But unfortunately, there is no real competition for Fell Mastery in Tier 99, so you're still going to be rushing about the place. If you wanted a build for soloing, it has less damage, but you can survive pretty much anything. Take Demonic Appetite, Soul Rending, and Demonic. Okay, moving on to stats, your primary is Agility, and for the secondaries, the clear winner is Crit, as it's built into Chaos Strike. Following Crit is Versatility, as it increases all damage, and you are using several things that aren't Chaos based, like Bloodlet or Demon Blades. The passive damage reduction is also quite useful. Next is Haste, and finally Mastery. This only increases Chaos damage, but it also increases your movement speed, which will have a more esoteric effect on your DPS. And now all that's left is to take a look at the weapon. Here are the main traits. Rage of the Illidari adds an explosion after your weapon ability ends, but sadly it deals split damage. Anguish of the Deceiver adds some more damage onto I-Beam, and Inner Demons is just a random passive AoE. And here are some more useful traits. It's more crit damage on Chaos Strike, a 1 minute reduction on Metamorphosis, and some more AoE damage. And here are the rest. The weapon is not a talent system, it's simply extra leveling. You will find different flavoured relics that add a rank to a trait and increase your weapon's item level. The best relic to take is simply the highest item level. Because it takes time to unlock, the initial route is important. There aren't any traits that change your gameplay, so it's just a case of going around picking up damage. On this weapon, all of the main damage traits are in the centre of the tree, and whilst it's possible to go up to Rage with Illidari very quickly, you have to get there through several gates. So before we start heading up and left, it's worth saying that the biggest damage increase you'll see is from reducing the cooldown on Metamorphosis via Unleashed Demons. However, you actually need to be using it off cooldown to realise this gain. If you aren't doing that, there's little point taking it first. Okay, so if you're going to be chaining messes, take Unleashed Demons. If not, start with Sharpened Glaives. Regardless of your choice, the second trait will be Balanced Blades. Then it's straight to Anguish the Deceiver through Critical Chaos and Chaos Vision. We then want to head up to Rage of the Illidari, so take Unleashed Demons if you didn't already, then Demon Speed and Illidari Knowledge. With 2 gold traits down, the question now is whether you are going to be doing a lot of dungeon grinding. If so, taking Feast on the Souls will help kill trash faster. But either way, you'll be heading up to take Contain Fury and Demon Rage. With 120 Fury, you can store enough to cast 3 Chaos Strikes in a row, which is very helpful for momentum. Then it's going to be going down to Inner Demons, taking Deceiver's Fury and Feast on the Souls if you haven't already, and then finishing with Overwhelming Power. And that concludes both the weapon and the first Havoc guide for Legion. If you found it helpful, please like the video as that will help others find it. If you wanted more detailed information, I'll be taking a closer look at different mechanics in the future, as well as other specs and classes. Best of luck in Legion, and thanks for watching.